I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about sewing techniques that seem really intimidating, but are actually much easier than you think. We'll cover 10 skills that can add beautiful, polished details to your garments. Things like making your own bias tape, sewing invisible zippers, even hand-stitched buttonholes. We'll break down exactly why these techniques aren't as scary as they seem, plus the tools and tricks that make them totally accessible, even if you're a beginner. All right, Haley, here's our icebreaker for today. What's a sewing technique you put off trying for way too long, only to discover it wasn't nearly as hard as you thought?
Okay, I think that the one that intimidated me the most and I avoided the most was welt pockets. I think one, because they're easy to avoid. You just don't have to.
You don't have to do it.
Have to do them if you don't want to, which is a hot tip if you want to make a pattern.
Yeah, you just leave them off.
You don't want to make welt pockets, you just leave them off. So I think that was part of it. But the reason it intimidated me is because you have to cut into the center of the piece.
Yeah.
So you could have something that is perfectly beautiful and then mess up the cut. Cutting is the one thing you can't undo.
You can't.
And
yeah.
I understood this.
Yeah.
And it scared me.
It's kind of like steeking and knitting. If any of you are knitters out there where you have to cut through the stitches, it's very scary.
Yeah. So I think that was one that stressed me out the most. How I overcame it is that I started becoming more strategic about when I applied my welt pockets. I did that to the piece before I attached anything else to it, because worst case scenario, I'm cutting a new piece.
Yeah.
I don't love that.
Yeah.
But I will do it if I have to.
At least you haven't assembled the whole garment.
Exactly. You haven't sunk quite as much time into it. I think that learning to take that approach really helps me to take the pressure off. It was the pressure that was stopping me.
Yeah.
The perceived pressure.
Yeah. And there are always ways to mitigate that.
Right.
So that's a good tip.
And once I could take that pressure off a little bit, then the stakes just didn't feel as high, and I could just focus on taking my time, using all of the other techniques I knew to mitigate the risk, stay stitching and all of those things. And then honestly, now I really like sewing them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's mine. What about you?
For me, I think not so much a technique. I feel like I'm not that intimidated by techniques and trying new things as much as I am by new tools.
Okay.
Maybe intimidated is not the right word, but I kind of feel like I already have my tools that work for me. I don't need to add more stuff, more tools. And the thing that I put off for way too long when I was a newbie, when I was first starting to sew, is learning how to use all the presser feet that I had. Because my machine came with my first machine came with a whole bunch of presser feet in one of those little mesh bags, Yeah. And I just put it away and didn't really think about it for a long time, because it just felt like I don't want to learn all this stuff. I don't need to. I can just make do with what I already know how to use. And I feel like it's kind of silly, because the presser feet really do make a lot of jobs easier. And once you learn how to use them, it's kind of hard to go back. So I feel like that was something that I really put off for way too long.
Okay. I have a related question. Are you the kind of person who reads the manual?
No. I never read the manual.
Eric and I got in an argument, a really stupid, benign argument, non-argument about this recently. We got a new toaster oven, and he put the manual in the recycling. And I was like, no, I haven't read it yet. He's like, it's a toaster oven, Haley. I was like, there might be tricks. And you know what? There were.
I'm sure there were. I'm not saying it's a good way to be. I think it's much better if you read the manual.
Yeah, and it just was such a Like an aha moment. I'm like, oh, the manual users versus the non-manual users.
I like to just figure things out as I go.
I'm like, want to know the overlap of like your like astrological sign and the your use of a manual.
I do like to have it there for reference so I can go back. And if I can't figure something out,
okay, so you
I
save
have
it.
it. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you're like, that's, there's a spectrum of manual users, I feel.
Yeah. Like my Bernina manual is sitting open next to my machine.
Beautiful.
It's there. So anytime I need to look something up, I can look it up. But reading through it is just would bore me to tears. I'm a hands-on person.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm a both. I need like all of the input.
All right, well, this is a great icebreaker for this topic today. And if you have an icebreaker for a future episode, you can leave it for us. Just leave a question in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, and we'll answer it in a future episode. I don't know if Spotify has ratings, actually, but you can leave it in a comment there, and we'll see it. All right, so let's talk about our issue for today, because I think a lot of us have this mental list of sewing techniques that just kind of feel off limits. They're like things we see in beautiful garments and we think that's for somebody more advanced, or I'll learn that someday when I'm better. But here's what I've learned over the years. So many of those techniques aren't actually difficult. They just kind of seem that way because we haven't tried them yet, or because maybe we tried them once without the right guidance and it just didn't go well. So the truth is, a lot of impressive looking techniques just come down to having the right tool or knowing a simple trick. And once you have that, the mystery totally disappears. And I think this matters because when we avoid techniques out of fear, we limit what we can create. So we might skip a pattern we love because it has a detail that intimidates us, or we settle for a simpler finish when we really wanted something a little bit more special. So today, Haley and I are going to walk through 10 techniques that have this reputation for being hard, and we're going to demystify them for you. So Haley, what do you think makes certain techniques seem so intimidating in the first place?
I think that a lot of times we have this tendency to look at the detail or the finish as a whole rather than breaking it down into its like the series of steps that it takes to achieve the finished product. And oftentimes, once you break it down into the steps, you'll find that it's really just putting together a series of like techniques that or are familiar with in a different way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in knitting, there's like 2 stitches and it's just how you assemble those things. It's the same thing with sewing. There's like really like a finite number of techniques that we, swap around the order of, and it creates different effects. So I think that looking at it like too big picture, this is sometimes looking at something big picture is helpful and sometimes it's not. And I think this is one of those times where it's less helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that things that have a lot of steps to them and that you can't really get your head around when you first just look at it, those seem more intimidating than something where you say, okay, well, I just do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, and really like breaking it down into like the little steps allows you to take it like piece by piece, step by step. And I think that like also removes a little bit of risk from the situation. If you're perceiving like messing up a step over messing up the entire technique, it like takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I also think that there are certain techniques that do require a little bit of practice.
Sure.
Like you need a little bit of that hand-eye coordination and the muscle memory to go with them. And sometimes we're a bit impatient and we don't want to deal with that extra practice, even though it might take only, 10 or 15 minutes to try it out on some scrap fabric until you get the hang of it. So I think that's another thing that can get in the way a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's also a piece where I think obviously we can be very hard on ourselves. And what does it say like about my skill or about me if I mess this up? And I think that sometimes like this um this like pattern of thinking can keep us from doing lots of things beyond sewing.
Yeah, very true. That's very true.
Do you think that it's more about not having the right tools or not having clear instructions a lot of the time?
I think it's a little bit of both, because if you haven't done it before and you don't have clear instructions and a clear idea in your mind, like you're saying, of what the steps are, that's a big barrier. But I think also a lot of times people just don't know that there's a tool out there that'll make it a lot easier. And if you don't know about it, you don't know what you don't know. And that can make it seem more intimidating than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's both as well. I think that it's 80% instruction, 20% tool.
Yeah.
The instruction oftentimes can reveal the tool. So I think that like that's really the core of the issue. I remember when I first started learning to sew, I mean, that like the internet existed, but it wasn't like this like online encyclopedia of sewing like it is now. If I wanted to like I remember the first few times that I installed a zipper, I was like reading the package instructions, reading a book on the steps, and the book only has like 1 or 2 pictures.
Yeah.
You're just trying to put it all together. It's so nice now that we have like unlimited visual reference for so many things.
Yeah. And video, which really, really helps,
Oh my gosh,
I
seeing
think.
it in motion.
Yeah. It's very helpful. All right, well, let's get into our tips for today. So, we're going to talk about some of those techniques that we've been kind of dancing around, things that are maybe seem a little bit intimidating or seem like a lot of trouble, but they're actually not that hard. And maybe this will encourage you to try something new. So, the first one is one of my personal favorites. And I think this can really elevate a lot of your makes, and it's something I just did this weekend. I did this weekend, which is making your own bias tape. So this is something that sounds and even looks a little bit fancy, but it's incredibly simple. It's just such an easy thing to do, and a lot of people buy pre-made bias tape, and there's totally nothing wrong with that. I do that too sometimes. But when you make your own, you just open up so many possibilities because you can match your binding perfectly to your fabric, which is really nice. It just looks really professional. You can use a contrasting print for, kind of a fun pop of detail. You can also make it any width you want. There's just so many more possibilities when you make your own. And all you're doing is cutting strips of fabric on the bias. So that's at a 45-degree angle to the grain, and then folding them. That's really it. It's so easy to do. And if you want to make it even easier, there are these little tools called bias tape makers that you can get, and you just feed your strip through. So you cut those 45-degree strips, sew them together, and then you just feed them through the bias tape maker, and you press as you go, and it just folds the edges for you. So it folds those long edges in, so you don't have to put your fingers anywhere near that hot iron, which is really, really helpful. So I always keep a few different sizes on hand of these little tools. And honestly, once you try it, you'll wonder why you ever bought the pre-made stuff. And actually, Haley and I have a video. It's one of our older videos on our YouTube channel where we show 2 different methods for making bias tape.
Oh, yeah.
The continuous strip method, which is honestly the one I use the most, or just piecing it together from the individual strips. So if you want a little primer on how to make your own bias tape, you can go and watch that. It was a fun video to make.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Do you make your own bias tape a lot?
Exclusively.
Yeah.
I am a bias tape snob. And I don't, a lot of times, you can buy nice 100% bias tape lots of times by the yard. You'll find it at like, I find it more often at like sewing, like boutique type stores. But like Clover, I think the like Clover stuff in the package, it's like 50 poly, 50 cotton, and I hate the way it feels next to my skin. It's too papery for me.
It is very stiff.
And I just like love a little unexpected like floral or stripe bias tape.
Yeah,
so cute.
It is really cute. It is fun that you can add that in because you can make bias tape from your scraps, your leftover nicer cotton fabrics, and just have it on hand for those little contrast details. But I also like when it matches the fabric. It just looks so much more, I don't know, polished and
Totally.
beautiful on the inside.
Yeah.
Which,
and the bias tape maker is a must.
yeah.
I think I have nearly every size.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of bias tape, our next one is bias tape facings. This is one of my favorite tricks, and I think a lot of people don't even know that it's an option necessarily. So instead of using a traditional facing, which can be kind of bulky, it can flip out and even show through your fabric, you can finish a neckline or an armhole or like really any edge, but particularly curved edges with a bias tape facing. You just sew the bias tape to the edge and then flip it to the inside and stitch it down. There's like a few extra steps in there that make it look nice, like clipping and understitching and all of that. But it gives you such a clean and flat finish that is way less bulky. And I think that it's especially great for lightweight fabrics where a regular facing is too heavy, and adding interfacing to the facing, just like, it's just all too much. This is just a great lightweight finish to use. And once you try it, you'll really start looking at patterns really differently and thinking about where you could swap bias tape for a facing, or in some cases, even a lining. It's one of those techniques where you're really not adding difficulty. You're just making things like easier, or even just like the same level of difficulty, but in my opinion, with a nicer finish.
Yeah. I love doing this as well. Actually, the bias tape I made, I was using as a facing on the dress I sewed this weekend. And I think it's such a nice finish. And especially for a sheer fabric or really lightweight fabric, it's really nice.
You have a lot of versatility too, because you can control which width of bias tape that you're going to use. So you can really match that to your preferences and also to the weight of the fabric.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they think bias tape, they think binding. They think binding an edge and don't think about using it as a facing, which is another really good purpose. All right, number 3 is another one I really, really like, and I've been doing a lot of these lately, which are blind hems. So blind hems are another one that sounds advanced, but it's really just about knowing the technique and having the right presser foot too. Makes it a lot easier. So the idea is that your hem stitches are almost invisible from the right side of the garment. So you see this a lot on higher quality, ready-to-wear trousers and skirts. And the real secret behind this is a blind hem foot. And most machines do come with them, or you can buy them separately if you don't have one. And then it's just a very specific way of folding your fabric before you sew. So you fold the hem up, and then you fold it back on itself, so just a tiny bit of the hem allowance is peeking out. And then the foot guides your fabric so that the needle only catches a tiny bit of that outer fabric with each stitch. And depending on what kind of fabric it is, you won't even be able to see the stitches from the outside of the garment. So it takes a little practice to get your fold just right. But once you do it a few times, it just becomes second nature, and it's actually so easy. We have a video on this as well. I don't remember the title of it, something about how to get an invisible hem, something like that. But if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see it there. And I demonstrate exactly how to do this with the presser foot and how to fold it and everything. So if you've never done one of these, especially if you have a blind hem foot already, and you haven't ever used it, definitely check out that video, because I do this constantly. So I'd recommend practicing on some scraps first just to get the feel for it, but it's really not a skill that takes years to master. It's just about understanding how to do that fold, and that's really about it. The presser foot does the rest of the work, and it looks absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it can also work really well on knit fabrics, which I think is an often underused
I don't think I've ever done that.
Hemming.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. It's a good one. You can't get quite as as invisible of a look, but the stitch itself inherently has some stretch, so it does work.
Right.
So yeah, try it.
I love that idea.
Let me know how it works.
Okay.
Well, speaking of knit fabric, I think the next thing we're going to talk about is sewing with knit fabric, because I know a lot of people are really intimidated by knits, especially if they don't have a serger. But the thing is, you can absolutely sew knits on a regular sewing machine. And in fact, when I used to teach in-person sewing classes, one of my most popular classes was how to sew knits without a serger.
Yeah.
And we made a Tilly's Cocoa Dress, I think was the name of it.
Oh, that's a cute one.
It's cute. Yeah. And by the end of that class, everybody was converted to knits. It like really revolutionized their sewing, not to pat myself on the back. But I think that it's one of those skills that is just like so much easier than people perceive it to be.
Absolutely.
And you can absolutely sew it without a serger. You can sew it on a standard sewing machine, no problem. The key is just like a few different like tricks and techniques. The right needle is really imperative, using a ballpoint or a stretch needle so you don't damage the fabric and put runs in it. And then the stitch has to have some stretch to it, just like a serger stitch would have. A narrow zigzag works really great. And some machines, most machines that are made now, have specific stretch stitches built in. And you can use a twin needle for hems, or you can use a blind hem as well. And the twin needle gives you a nice professional look of a cover stitch without needing to actually use a cover stitch. The other thing that really helps people in sewing knits without a serger is using a walking foot, which does a really great job of feeding the fabric evenly, so that the feed dogs aren't just grabbing the fabric from below. The walking foot also walks it from the top side of your, sewing seam. So the outcome of that is that you don't get stretched out seams, which can be like is the enemy of a good knitwear piece. So knits are actually really forgiving in a lot of ways. They don't fray. You don't have to finish your seams if you don't want to. They're comfortable to wear, and they're very easy to fit, which is why I tend to sew with them so often. And I think so often why people fall in love with them once they overcome the initial fear.
Yeah.
Sarah, you sew a lot of knits these days?
Oh my gosh. I'm wearing all knits right now.
You are?
Everything head to toe is knit. I'm wearing our Palmer pants, which I sewed pretty recently. You can see them on our YouTube channel also if you want to take a look. But I made them in this double knit plaid fabric, which it looks really good. I love it. It
looks like a woven. I thought it was a woven fabric when she wore it in.
Yeah, it's great. These are like my new favorite pair of pants. So I'm wearing knit pants, I'm wearing a long sleeve knit shirt, and then I'm wearing a sweater vest that I knit. So hand knits and sewn knits all today. I love them because they're really easy and fast to sew, first of all, but that's not the main reason. The main reason I like to wear them. They're really comfy. So I wear knits, especially in cold weather. I wear them all the time. So yeah, I'm a big fan of knits, and if you haven't tried them on your regular sewing machine, then I would encourage you to explore, because if you like wearing them, you'll probably like sewing them.
And there's like I feel like there's a pipeline of you fall in love with knits, you start sewing them on your regular sewing machine, and then the serger follows.
Yeah.
The investment of us in a serger follows.
Yeah. And I think people think sergers are a lot more expensive than they are. You can really find a good serger that's not very expensive, and you'll get so much use out of it.
Yeah, I think that people end up investing in one, not because it's impossible to sew them on a regular sewing machine, but just because they love it sewing with knits so much.
Yeah. It's worth it.
Yeah, it's worth it.
All right, the next one is pin tucks. So pin tucks are one of those details that look really delicate and fancy, but they're surprisingly straightforward. So a pin tuck is just a tiny stitched fold in the fabric. And when you do a row of them, they create a really beautiful texture. So you can do them with your regular presser foot by just folding and stitching carefully. But if you want to make it really easy, a pin tuck foot is absolutely amazing. So a pin tuck foot has little grooves on the bottom that help you space your tucks evenly. And you use it with a twin needle, so it practically does the work for you. I think pin tucks are a great way to add something special to any kind of simple garment. So you can imagine like a row of pin tucks down the front of a plain blouse, for example, and it takes it from, kind of simple and basic to looking like an heirloom piece, just with that one little detail added. And if you add other kind of heirloom details, like maybe a lace insertion or something like that, or even little pleats, then it really gives it that special look. And because you're working with such small folds, it also doesn't take much fabric or much time to make a really big impact with such a small detail. I think it's a really fun thing to add to other projects. So I would encourage you to try that. We also have a video on pin tucks, I think, or at least the pin tuck foot. So definitely check the YouTube channel for that if you want to give it a shot.
That's one of my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I love sewing pin tucks.
They're fun. They're fun to sew.
I'm like a really big fan of precision sewing.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very zen. And pin tucks, although it doesn't take like that much precision, it like is right on that edge for me.
Yeah, I like the way they look. I think they're just so pretty. I made a bloom blouse a few months ago, and it's so fun to just put the little staggered pin tucks at the front. It just gives it that special look.
I love that detail.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're going to talk about baby hems. Baby hem is also referred to as a narrow hem or a rolled hem, are perfect for lightweight and sheer fabrics. They sound tricky because you're working with such a tiny hem allowance, usually like 1/4 of an inch or even less, but the technique is actually super simple. It's the same as a regular hem, but smaller. You fold a tiny bit, you press, you fold again, and then you stitch really close to that inner fold. The key is pressing well and going slowly. You can also use tricks like creating your first fold and then stitching, and then folding again and stitching is one of my favorite ways to do it. But my favorite way to do it is to use a little help with the rolled hem foot because it makes it like nearly foolproof. The foot curls the fabric for you into that double turn hem as you sew. So it really like removes several steps of the process. It was my first specialty foot outside of like a zipper foot buttonhole, invisible zipper foot that I ever used when I had to hem probably 20 yards of chiffon in like a couture quality dress. And I'm telling you, this like saved me days of my life. So baby hems are a really great thing for edges like ruffles, sheer blouses, flowy skirts, where you don't really want a heavy finish weighing things down. And curved edges in general where you just like simply cannot turn a bigger seam allowance. And I swear that once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite meditative. And there's something really satisfying about watching that tiny, perfect hem form. I love it.
Yeah. Do you think there's a difference between a rolled hem and a baby hem in your mind, or are they kind of the same? Because in my mind, a rolled hem maybe is a little softer.
Yeah, I think, and I often think of a rolled hem as hand done.
Often it is like on a vintage scarf or something like that. It's hand sewn.
I see them used interchangeably, but I always think of a rolled hem as being hand stitched,
which does have that much softer fold to it. It's not pressed like flat.
Exactly. Which gives it that kind of like roll look to it.
Yeah. The way I do a baby hem, which might help you guys if you haven't done one before, Haley kind of mentioned this, but fold it, then you stitch it in place, then trim close to that fold. So you've got that tiny little fold that you've stitched very close to the edge, then you trim, and then you fold again. And that really helps you to do that tiny, tiny turn and get it, because the stitching actually provides a little stiffness.
Yeah, that's, if I'm not using a rolled hem, or a rolled hem foot, that's the technique that I will use. If you're using really lightweight fabric, you can use a spray stabilizer, which also really helps.
That does really help. All right, the next one is very easy detail to add, which is top stitching. And I think that's one of those things that can really elevate a garment. And I think sometimes people avoid it because they're worried that it won't look neat. And there's definitely that danger, but top stitching really is not that hard. It's just sewing a visible line of stitching on the outside of your garment, and that's it. And the tricks to making it look good are actually pretty simple. So you want to use a longer stitch length. This is something I didn't realize at first when I first started learning how to do top stitching, but it does look a lot more intentional when you use a longer stitch length. So if you look at a pair of jeans you already have, for example, you'll notice that the stitch length on the top stitching is longer than the construction stitching. And then you want to use a top stitching needle especially if you're going through thick layers. So the top stitching needle has a bigger eye. So that means that you can use top stitching thread with it and it won't break. Because if you use a regular needle with top stitching thread, then you're in danger of the thread breaking as it goes through the fabric. And then just go slowly. I also like to use the edge of my presser foot as a guide, or you can use even painter's tape on your machine to mark a line to follow. Another thing that can help if you're, especially if you're stitching kind of far away from the edge and it's a little bit tricky, if you have a walking foot, they often come with a guide that you can attach to it. So you can it's meant for quilting primarily, but it'll help you to do those really even lines that are, even to the edge, even if it's not right up against the edge. So that's another really helpful trick and another helpful use for the walking foot. I feel like the walking foot solves so many problems.
I know quilters have the best tools.
They really do. There's so many great things we can learn from quilters. So that's for me. That's just really helpful when I'm doing top stitching. And back to the top stitching thread. So some people like to use top stitching thread, which is thicker and it makes the stitching more visible. You can also use regular thread. That works fine too. It just depends on the look you want. So you just kind of decide on the look you want. Also, the fabric you're using, can it handle a thick thread like that? Obviously, if you're sewing in a very delicate fabric, a thicker thread is going to be much trickier to sew. So you just want to test it out, try it out a little bit, use some scraps and see what works for you, what gets you the right look. The more you do it, the more confident you get with it. And, a little wobble here and there honestly doesn't matter as much as you'd think. It'll still look great, even if you have a couple small mistakes here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not going to notice that. It'll still look beautiful. And so don't let that intimidate you. Another thing for me that's been really helpful lately. So my machine went in for servicing a few months ago, and it was going to take a really, really long time to get it back. Everybody's backed up. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up purchasing a backup machine recently, and that makes top stitching a lot faster and easier.
Yes.
So if you're sewing a pair of jeans or something and you have a second machine, if you happen to have one, even if it's like your starter machine that you never got rid of or something like that, having that available to you so you have both threaded with the different threads and the different needles and you don't have to go back and forth switching things out all the time speeds it up a lot. So if you're sewing like a pair of jeans or something like that where there's a lot of top stitching, if you have that available to you, it's really helpful. Or if you can borrow a machine from a friend.
Yeah, I know one of our sample sewers that we work with almost always uses a 2-machine setup for that reason.
Yeah. It's a real time saver. And for me, I'm about to sew a denim skirt and I'm going to do some fancy top stitching on it. And what I'm going to do, I have a less expensive machine, which is my backup machine. And then I have my Bernina, which is my main machine. And actually, Sienna suggested this to me, and I think it's a great idea, which is using the Bernina for the top stitching.
Yeah, a little bit better quality stitching.
Yeah, because you have the better quality stitching, and I have, the walking foot, I have everything to go with it, and use the less expensive machine for the construction, which, not that it doesn't matter, but you're not gonna see the stitches.
Yeah. Another tip that pertains to top stitching and presser feet is that there's lots of guided foots too, in addition to the walking foot, like 1/4-inch feet,
Yes.
edge stitching feet. You can use those if you're gaining a little bit of confidence with your top stitching, and that can be like a really great kind of training wheels, if you will.
Yeah, I actually recently got a 1/4-inch foot, which is also called a patchwork foot. So it's another thing we took from the quilters.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful for top stitching because you get that even 1/4-inch stitch, especially with jeans and things like that.
I think that's my most used specialty foot, probably.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I think mine is the edge stitch foot, probably. I use that a lot.
Next, we're going to talk about underlining. Underlining sounds like this really advanced couture technique, and it is oftentimes cited as one, but at its core, it's truly just adding a second layer of fabric beneath your main fabric. So all you're doing is you're cutting an underlining. It can be the same fabric as your fashion fabric. It can be, lots of times people will use flannel, or like a washed muslin or poplin, something like that.
Organza.
Organza. There's lots of different fabrics you can use to get different effects. And then you baste them together along the outer edge, and then you treat them as one piece as you sew. That's it. There's extra time put into the extra cutting and the basting of the pieces together. But that's like, it's truly a very simple technique that can really have a big impact on your finished garment. So why might you want to underline something? It can add body to a drapey fabric. It can make a sheer fabric more opaque. It can make something easier to mark on. It can make something easier to do hand stitching because you can hand stitch to the underlining and have it be absolutely invisible on the outer edge. And it can also just make a fabric that's tricky to handle behave a little bit better. It's kind of like a bra for your fabric.
I like that. That's a good way to think about it.
It gives your fabric basically the support that it needs, depending on the context of the project you're using it for. It does, like I said, it adds time to your cutting and prep, but the sewing is not any more complicated, and the results really make a huge difference. Sari, do you underline often, or what is the last thing you underlined?
Gosh, I don't know what the last thing I underlined is, but I do it on occasion, especially when I want to add some stability to something, because often you don't want interfacing throughout an entire garment or entire bodice, for example. And so underlining gives that little bit of stability. Or one other reason I use it is to add opacity. So if I'm sewing with a sheer fabric and I don't want the seams to show. So for example, let's say you're making a skirt and the outer fabric is sheer, you'll still be able to see, even if you line it, you'll be able to see the seams, right? You'll see the seams and you'll see the lining. But if you underline it, the seams will be hidden on the inside of the lining because you're sewing the two pieces as one. You don't get that kind of free-flowing motion of the outer fabric.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off there. But it does help if you don't want the seams to show. Like if you were making, something with princess seams, for example, and you don't want real super visible seams, that's another reason you'd use it. And I have one more trick for underlining, which is if you want to save a little bit of time, because the real time commitment with underlining, other than the cutting, is basting everything together. You can use a glue stick and just glue baste it together, and it'll wash out, and you don't have to think about it after it's all sewn together. So that's just a little trick for you.
I wish I would have known that when I made wedding dresses, because I was underlining
everything,
practically everything, unless it was something that had a cowl neckline, something where we wanted to have the drape of the fabric. Practically everything is underlined. If you've ever held or wore a very high quality dress, lots of times they're very heavy, and that's because there's underlining and all sorts of interior structural details that make them quite heavy.
I think that's a good thing for people to think about when thinking about, when might I want to underline, is thinking about wedding dresses, because that's a case where you have this delicate, beautiful fabric or maybe lace or something like that, but you want a lot of structure and support. So that's even if you're not making a wedding dress, if you have something where you want structure and support, but you're using a delicate fabric, that's a good case for adding stability in some way, whether that's underlining or some other added stability.
Totally.
All right, the next one is invisible zippers. So invisible zippers are one of those things that I think intimidate a lot of people. I think closures in general, and we're going to talk about another closure next, but I think closures in general can be intimidating to people, but invisible zippers are really not that hard. They look like magic from the outside because you see the zipper pull, but the rest just disappears into the seam and it looks so seamless, but it's really not that hard to do. I find them easier than a regular centered zipper. So the secret is just having an invisible zipper foot. So the invisible zipper foot has grooves that let you stitch right up against the coils of the zipper, which is what makes the zipper invisible when it's closed. And it allows you to get really close to the zipper teeth without worrying about accidentally stitching too close and not being able to open and close the zipper. So it kind of gives you that perfect distance from the teeth. And you insert invisible zippers before you sew the seam closed, which is the opposite of regular zippers. And that actually makes it easier in some ways because you're working with open edges. You're not working with that closure at the bottom or at the top, or the seam rather, at the bottom, at the top, kind of holding everything closed while you're trying to stitch. So there are a lot of great tutorials out there, including some on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look. And maybe it's time to actually do an update on the invisible zipper tutorial. That would be a fun video to do.
It would be.
Maybe by the time you're listening to this, we'll have a new one. Because I'm planning out some videos right now. But the ones we have are great too, and they walk you through the steps. But honestly, once you do one or two of these, you're going to have them down. They're much, much easier than they seem, especially with the invisible zipper foot. And I would say I prefer invisible zippers to regular zippers, not just because of the way they look, but the whole process just feels easier and cleaner to me. And I can do them with my eyes closed practically now.
Yeah, the mistake I'm most likely to make when I'm sewing an invisible zipper is twisting
it, yeah.
the zipper tape.
Mm-hmm.
But like I feel like that says a lot to how simple they actually are.
Yeah, I think another thing to watch out for with invisible zippers as opposed to a regular zipper, because you haven't sewn everything together above and below it, you want to make sure that any, like a waistline or any other seams line up when you zip it closed. So that's one thing to look out for. I just mark my zipper where the waistline should go on both sides of the zipper so that I can align that. Because that, you don't want to zip up your zipper and the back of the waist is an inch higher than the front of the waist, which happens somehow when fabrics stretch. It can happen. I was actually working with a very stretchy. I was telling you, Haley, before we started recording that I made this dress this weekend in a rayon gauze that had a lot of stretch to it, and so I had to be very careful. When I put in the invisible zipper, I actually had to unpick it a little bit and redo that part because it had gotten stretched out, and the one side of the waist ended up higher than the other.
That is one place where even if I'm like an eighth of an inch off, I am going to unpick and redo it because it drives me crazy.
It drives me crazy too. I hate when seams don't match up.
Well, I'm going to round us off with one final technique that is also closure related. Okay, so hand stitch buttonholes. Okay, this one might seem like the most intimidating of all. And maybe it is, but hear me out. Hand stitch buttonholes look so beautiful, and they have this quality that machine buttonholes just cannot replicate. And while they do definitely take more time, the actual technique, it's just one stitch repeated over and over. It's called the buttonhole stitch, and once you learn it, you're just doing the same thing around the opening of the buttonhole. The rhythm is actually really relaxing once you get going, as hand sewing tends to be. And because it's hand sewing, you could do it on the couch or outside. You can do it wherever you can sit down. The results, I think, are worth it, especially on special garments where you want that really handmade, high-quality look. One of my favorite places to use this is on something like a jacket or a coat, especially where you only have a couple buttonholes to do. And honestly, if you've ever been really frustrated with machine buttonholes, I think we all have been at some point. Maybe your machine's making inconsistent stitches, or you're just having like trouble getting it to work with a certain fabric. Hand stitching gives you total control. The first time I actually hand stitched a buttonhole was on a velvet jacket.
Oh, wow.
Because I could not get it to look nice without getting a totally crushed appearance to my velvet. And I think that like all of the trial and error of testing buttonholes on my velvet swatch took me longer than actually just hand sewing the buttonhole. So this is one I will say that I think taking a class or a workshop, if you can, to get the initial instruction can be really helpful. We actually have a skills workshop on this one, but the skill itself is absolutely learnable and approachable.
Yeah, I think our hand sewn buttonholes skill workshop is coming up, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
coming up
it'll be out by the time this episode
Oh, that's
airs.
right, yeah. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely check that out. I think it'd be really fun to do as a class too, do
Yeah.
together with other people. It's a cool one. All right, well, let's take a look back at what we covered today. We talked about 10 techniques that might seem intimidating, but are actually very approachable. So, first, we talked about making your own bias tape, which is a simple way to get custom, perfectly matched finishes. Then, bias tape facings, which can replace bulky, traditional facings. Blind hems, which just require a foot and a folding technique. Sewing with knits on a regular sewing machine. By the way, we have a YouTube video on that as well. So definitely check out the YouTube channel if you haven't yet, because we've got videos on almost all of these techniques. Pin tucks for beautiful texture, baby hems for delicate edges, top stitching to add polish, underlining for extra support and structure, invisible zippers, which are easier than they look, and hand stitch buttonholes for a truly special finish. All right. So my big takeaway from the episode is that for me, it really comes back to something we talk about quite a lot here, which is whenever you encounter a problem or something that feels hard, solving it is just usually one of two things, which is having the right tool or having the right technique. And once you have those, things that seemed impossible become totally doable. So if there's a technique on this list that you've been avoiding, I hope this gives you the little push you need to try it, because you just might surprise yourself and find a new favorite that you thought was hard. What about you, Haley? What's your takeaway for today?
I think that one of my takeaways is that there's so much amazing information and videos and tutorials on so many of these techniques now, and that's amazing. I love that that's available to us. However, sometimes I think it can add to the um decision fatigue, and can get you stuck in that research phase rather than moving forward and just giving it a try.
Hmm.
And so my something that I have recommended before and I will recommend again is that pick a couple trusted sources for yourself. This can be a blog or a company like Seamwork, shameless plug, or a book. I like to have a book reference and an online reference, and have those be your go-to sources, so that you don't get stuck in that research phase and you can get into the real world and put it into practice.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway and my tip.
Yeah, I think that's a really great one. And I've mentioned the YouTube channel many times, but we have so many great videos on there for all of these techniques, I think, are covered on there. So if you're looking for a good resource, another shameless plug, I think you should check it out.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Seeing things in motion is then so helpful in learning a new skill.
Yeah. So we talked about the skills workshop that Erica is going to be teaching on hand stitch buttonholes. So I just looked it up, and it'll be coming out right after this episode airs. So if you're listening to this right now, you still have time to sign up for it. And she's going to walk you through the buttonhole stitch, how to prepare your fabric, and how to get consistent, beautiful results on your hand stitch buttonholes. So if you are interested in that, definitely check it out. Just go to seamwork.com and look at our classes, and you'll see everything there. And if you've struggled with machine buttonholes, I think this is a really cool way to add a little special touch. And I don't know, it elevates whatever you're sewing. So it's a really fun skill to learn. And it's a really cool way to add that little detail. And Erica's such a great teacher. She's going to walk you through every step of it. I really love these workshops because you get to do these new things and practice these new skills with other people, which I think is really helpful. And it's available for all Seamwork members. So if you're not a member yet, just go to seamwork.com to join us, and you'll get access to this workshop, plus so much more. All right, well, if you liked this episode, please leave us a review. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, just head over to seamwork.com to learn how to join. And you get access to all those classes that we mentioned, as well as our whole catalog of patterns. All right, that's it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.